帰れよ。どうして？昨日も言ったはずだ。これは遊びじゃない。
Keisuke's face contorted, as if he were struggling with something.
俺は終身刑で惨めに死を待つよりはマシだからここまで来た。すぐに終わらせて戻る。誰の助けもいらない。
Akira made his tone hard and sharp, knowing that it would hurt Keisuke. It was the only way his words would reach. It had always been like this. Ever since they were children, Keisuke never thought things through. He would work frantically to do what he felt was right, and it would backfire every time. And despite his inability to follow through, he was also curiously stubborn. If Akira didn't make himself perfectly clear, he would never realize how serious this was. Akira had no intention of losing, of course, but there was no guarantee that he would make it out alive. It'd be one thing if Keisuke were handy in a fight, but that simply wasn't the case.
でも
Keisuke's hands formed loose fists, his eyes still fixed on his feet.
帰るならまた旧祖地区を抜けなくちゃいけない。ここまではアキラを追ってきたからたどり着けたようなもので。
True. This time, Keisuke will have to cross the old lands alone, and without losing his way.
道は覚えてないか。
A disappointed sigh spilled from Akira's mouth. He considered sending Keisuke back anyway, telling him he'd brought this upon himself, but it would be going a tad too far, and besides, Keisuke had technically done it for his sake. Plus, he'd have trouble sleeping at night if he later came face to face with Keisuke's corpse. What to do?
Akira?
Keisuke looked up as though to assess Akira's response, now that he had fallen silent. There was no other choice. If Keisuke couldn't go home, he would have to remain here. With obvious reluctance, Akira opened his mouth.
帰れないならいるしかないだろ。
Even though this was the answer Keisuke wanted, he himself seemed surprised by Akira's reply.
いいのか？本当に？
It wasn't about whether he was okay with it. After watching Akira's cheerless face for a little while, Keisuke put on a small smile.
よかった。ありがとう、アキラ。
He hadn't done anything deserving of gratitude, but Keisuke appeared genuinely happy. It felt peculiar.
何かあったら手伝うから。
With no way to answer him, Akira wordlessly sat down on the sofa. For better or worse, they were stuck together now.
明日からはどうする？
Seating himself beside Akira as he spoke, Keisuke trailed off in the middle of his sentence, then made a weird noise. Maybe he was beating back a yawn. He leaned back in the sofa and rubbed his eyes, then gave Akira a sluggish look. It appeared to be taking all his effort just to stay awake.
ごめん。なんか落ち着いたら急に眠くなってきた。少し寝てもいいかな。
Did Keisuke actually mean to go straight to sleep? Here? Maybe he truly didn't understand the situation. But what could Akira do about it? He shook his head. It felt like looking after a child.
アキラは？
俺はいい。
Akira was wary, but his thoughts remained clear. He wasn't likely to fall asleep anytime soon.
そうか。体休めておいた方がいいよ。
Keisuke clasped his hands over his stomach, his eyelids almost fully closed.
そうだ。それと、アキラ。
His closed eyelids rose once more, and he turned his face to look at Akira. Though he looked hopelessly tired, his mouth still formed a small smile.
絶対勝って一緒に帰ろうな。
This time, his eyelids closed more firmly, and his breathing soon slowed into the rhythm of sleep. Akira regarded his sleeping face with ambivalence. The scene he had witnessed through the store window. That was the kind of world this was. What concerned him most of all was Keisuke's failure to grasp this. Sensing many difficulties in store for him, Akira stayed awake, watching the entrance until the sun had risen once more. Only when it had grown light outside did Akira become tired enough to shut his eyes. A half hour or so later, he woke, his mind clear. In the pale sunlight shining through the entrance, both the cave and what he could see of the cityscape gave a different impression than they had at night. Not that it seemed any less foreboding. He shifted away from the sofa's backrest, thus rose to fill his vision with white. When he turned his face to avoid breathing it in, he saw that Keisuke was still sound asleep. His expression was so tranquil. It was as if he were part of another world. Will Keisuke ever have another chance to wallow in such peaceful slumber? While wondering this, he shook Keisuke gently.
おい。
Keisuke grunted and stirred a little, then went right back to sleep. Growing impatient, Akira shook him harder.
起きろ。
His eyelids twitched a few times before finally cracking open. Rubbing his eyes, he gave Akira a drowsy smile.
アキラ、
He was utterly at peace. He was so at peace, in fact, that Akira found it downright obnoxious. He slapped Keisuke on the back.
いきなり何すんだよ。
目覚めたか。行くぞ。
Ignoring Keisuke's teary-eyed glare, Akira rose with his bag in hand.
行くってどこへ？
Keisuke quickly got up and grabbed his bag off the floor.
イグラに決まってる。
Keisuke's expression instantly clouded over.
いくら？
参加証のタグももう用意されてる。
Akira browsed the tag hanging from his neck.
負けたら死ぬかもしれないんだよな。
He was still going on about that? Aggravated, Akira thrust his face close to Keisuke's, looking him right in the eye.
何度も言ってるだろう。これは遊びじゃない。俺も人を殺すことになる。
Keisuke went rigid. In Igura, everything will be on the line. In order to survive, Akira will have to kill. What would that feel like? Crushing the life out of someone as they struggle in his grip. Deep in his belly, Akira felt a shiver of anticipation.
それがここのルールだ。殺さなければ殺される。それ以外に道はない。
He was here to bring down Ilray, Igura's undefeated champion. The desire to face this invisible tyrant had taken root in Akira's soul. He will have to wade through the blood of many in order to reach that point. The color drained from Keisuke's face. He was finally beginning to understand.
人を殺すんだよな。
じゃなきゃ勝ち残れない。
With that, Akira turned toward the exit.
どこ行くんだよ。
イグラが実際にはどんな形で行われているのか、豊島の住人や他の参加者たちはどうしているのか、少し見てくる。お前はここで待ってろ。
It will be foolish to make a move without first acquiring some basic information.
俺も行く。
Keisuke's desperate offer made Akira pause.
ダメだ。丸腰だろ。
でも一人で待ってるなんて嫌だ。
Deciding it was futile to waste time bickering. Akira sighed and returned to Keisuke. He pulled a knife from his waist and held it out, sheath and all.
持ってろ。
アキラは予備のナイフか何か持ってるのか？
いや。
He had left the knife they'd given him back in his room. Keisuke pulled back his hand.
それじゃあ今度はアキラが丸腰になるじゃないか。意味がないよ。
俺はいい。
The use of weapons was forbidden in Blaster, so Akira was used to fighting with his fists. As long as he didn't have to deal with guns, which were outlawed in igra anyway. He'd be fine.
一つ約束しろ。
え？
自分の身は自分で守れ。
Keisuke's eyes widened a bit, but he was quick to press his lips together and give a firm nod.
わかった。
He reached for the knife again. Once he'd taken it, he unsheathed it and gazed intently at the blade.
なんか変わったナイフだな。これ文字が書いてある。
昔軍で支給されてたやつだ。
こんなんだったっけ？
多分。
Honestly, Akira wasn't sure. He had never been on an actual battlefield or seen what real soldiers carried.
そっか、そうだったかな。
Nodding, Keisuke returned the knife to its sheath.
行くぞ。
Passing through the doorless exit, they ventured once again onto the streets of Toshima. The sky was an ambiguous pale gray, neither sunny nor cloudy. The environment had suffered greatly in the war, and the fair weather had been a rare occurrence ever since. Just like last night, Akira didn't see anyone when he looked around the main avenue. Even so, the view was better than at night, and he had no trouble distinguishing the landscape. The atmosphere was also the same as before. Although the streets seemed empty, he could sense the presence of people all around. Bloodless, barely concealed, as if they were stalking him from the shadows. The sun might have risen, but he was in no mood to saunter around in the open.
夜も思ったけど、全然人見ないんだよな、この街。
Keisuke murmured, starting toward the center of the room.
おい！
Akira quickly grabbed him by the arm and dragged him back to the shadow of the coffee shop.
無防備に出歩くな。
Unnerved by Akira's hearthstone, Keisuke blinked and nodded. A choking tension filled the air as they started walking. Akira strove to keep to the shadows by the roadside. The alleyways they passed from time to time were so dim he could make out nothing of what lurked in their depths. When they came to an intersection, he saw a sign protruding from an alley on the right side, off to the east. Utterly faded, yet retaining vestiges of gaudy coloring. It was the kind of sign one might expect to see in a red light district. Just as he looked away, he thought he heard a shrill voice. He glanced back at the alleyway.
何か聞こえなかったか？今、声みたいな感じの。
ああ。
Keisuke was studying the sign intently, having also noticed the sound. Akira had barely heard it, so he couldn't be sure, but the sound had felt out of place in this knife-sharp atmosphere. It nagged at him. He approached the sign.
Akira!
As Keisuke ran after him, he pressed his back to the wall and took a brief look down the alley. The alley was wider than he thought, with shops lined up in tight rows on both sides. As expected, they were mostly bars and brothels. All were in despair, of course, with so many of their decorative lights broken. He dubbed it would be very bright even if they were all switched on. There was no one around, while the same could be said for the rest of Toshima. Imagining how lively it must have been before the war made this place feel even more deserted than the rest. Maybe he'd only imagined the voice after all. Pushing himself away from the wall, he took a step down the alleyway. The road was shadowy, with buildings blocking the sun on both sides. The aura of this place was such that Akira would not have been surprised to find a spirit or two standing amid the skeletal remains of these once crowded stores.
こういうさ、確かに人がいたんだなって簡単に想像できるところってかえって不気味だよな。なんか生々しいっていうか。
He knew what Keisuke was trying to say. Fear was something that grew stronger the more real its source seemed. But to Akira, very little felt real, or at least real enough to frighten him. He could process a phenomenon and understand it intellectually, but that was different. As he reached the middle of the road, Akira stopped dead in his tracks.
アキラ？
Somebody was here. The presence was well hidden, but he could feel it. Where was it coming from? A faint sound behind them. But before he could turn,
ちょっとそこの
a high voice echoed down the alley. The sound of nimble footsteps followed shortly after.
なんだ？
Their sheer momentum forced him to turn. A petite girl appeared in front of him. She had golden hair, a delicate stature, and slim arms and legs. Her large blue eyes were especially striking.
女の子？
The girl's lip curved wildly in response to Keisuke's baffled murmur.
残念でした。ついてます。
ついて？
The crudeness of the answer left Keisuke speechless. Indeed, upon further scrutiny, the stranger's bony fingers and knees were indicative of a male physique. Nevertheless, it was hard not to mistake him for a girl. The smoothness of his skin all but invited one's touch.
ってそんなことはどうでもいいわけよ。兄さんたちさ、ここ俺の縄張りなんだけど、勝手に入ってこられちゃ困るんだよね。
縄張り？
そうそう、人の島に無断で踏み込んだやつは通行料払ってもらってるんだよね。
通行料って。
Keisuke turned back to Akira, his expression bewildered.
というかさ、知らないの？もしかして来たばっかとか。
The boy, who had been standing with his hands on his hips, brow furrowed, suddenly blinked in surprise.
あ、でもそっちのいい男な兄さんはイグラに参加してんだね。
The boy put on a challenging smile as he pointed to the tag on Akira's chest. The tag swung across the boy's own chest as well. Another fighter. In other words, an enemy? Perhaps sensing Akira's sudden wariness, the boy flapped a hand at him.
そんな顔しなくても今んとこは別に戦う気ないから安心してよ。兄さんいい男だしさ。他にボコっちゃってもいいどうでもいいのがいくらでもいるし。
Keisuke gave the boy a dumbfounded look. Though his appearance was such that people might easily mistake his gender, he seemed utterly at ease in this savage town, even when facing two total strangers. Perhaps he was stronger than he looked. Either way, there was something very odd about him. Meanwhile, oblivious to Akira's growing doubts, the boy had put on a wide grin.
ま、初心者ならしょうがないか。じゃあ通行料は免除にしてあげるよ。兄さんの顔に免じて。
The boy had spent most of the conversation staring at Akira's face. He appeared to have taken quite a liking to it.
ついでに何か聞きたいこととかある？教えられることなら教えてあげる。
That sounded like showing compassion to an enemy. Not starting a fight here was one thing, but offering to lend them a hand, it sparked unavoidable suspicion. Even Keisuke, who was not the suspicious type, gave Akira an easy glance. Yet, while Akira sensed that there must be some kind of scheme involved, taking the bait was still an option if it meant he might acquire some information. At any rate, this was his only lead. That thought made him open his mouth, ending the tense silence that had fallen.
どこか武器が手に入るところを知らないか。
武器？
It bothered him that Keisuke didn't have a weapon. He couldn't keep Akira's knife forever.
武器ね。
The boy seemed to consider this. Akira wasn't really expecting an answer. He knew that such shops had to exist. As long as people live here, there will be those who sold them what they needed. But even though everyone likely knew where they were, there will be an ironclad rule not to mention them. Furthermore, Akira was an igra fighter. In other words, a potential enemy. It would be foolish for the boy to give him any information that might literally be used to stab him in the back.
なんで？まさか素手ってわけじゃないよね。まあスタイルにもよるだろうけど。
俺じゃない。こっちだ。
He pointed his chin at Keisuke, who had the decency to look embarrassed.
ああ、参加してない方の兄さんか。何も持ってないの？
ああ。
そっか。じゃあさ、こんなのはどう？
The boy fished through his waist pouch, then grabbed something and held it out. It was a folding knife, the kind that snapped open with a push of a button. With the blade extended, it was about 20 centimeters long.
これだったら初心者でも扱いやすいし、軽いし、あげるよ。
Keisuke waved both hands in front of his face, startled by the boy's casual offer.
いやいや、もらうのは悪いから。
だってさ、めったに使わないし、いいよ。
Keisuke continued his puppy-eyed protest a little while longer, but finally extended his hand.
ありがとう。
どういたしまして。
The boy grinned proudly. Even if it was a spare, it was very generous of him to give his knife to a total stranger. Akira could not begin to comprehend the boy's intentions.
じゃあこれ返さなきゃ。はい。
Keisuke pulled Akira's knife from his backpack and handed it over. Akira took it and thrust it back through his belt.
貸しにしといてあげる。いつか返して。
The boy's lips spread into an enticing smile.
体で。
はは
Kazuki yelped.
なんだよそれ。だって君、男だろ。
やだな。何マジになってんの？冗談だよ。
The boy crackled at the sour expression on Keisuke's face. And then, out of the blue, he pulled at Akira's arm.
へへへ。
The boy tugged at Akira and Keisuke's arm, pulling them close, then looked up at them with an incorrigible smile. Akira had no idea how to handle this display of an unearned affection, his side confusion giving way to irritation.
ま、それはさておき、せっかくだから参加すれば、兄さんも。
何に？
イグラにさ。
ああ、うん、イグラ。あ
Keisuke's eyes went as wide as saucers.
それこそ冗談だろう。無理に決まってる。
そんなの参加してみなきゃわかんないっしょ。ねえ。
The boy looked to Akira for agreement, but frankly, Akira didn't want Keisuke to get involved. It would just make things harder. Perhaps sensing this from Akira's expression, Keisuke redoubled his protests.
ほら、無理だって。俺だって参加なんかしたくない。
だってさ。
The boy wiggled his boot-clad toes suggestively.
この町じゃさ、いつ死んだっておかしくないんだよ。イグラに参加してようとしてなかろうとさ。だったら楽しんだ方がいいじゃん。